Peacock Angel by E.S. Drower, being some account of votaries of a secret cult and their sanctuaries. Chapter 6, Sitt Gule. He set his knee stoutly against the rock, and straightway by the spring poplars and elm trees, shaded a shadowy glade, arched overhead they grew and pleached with leaves of green. Theocritus, Evil 7. No water was laid on to our house, nor to any house in the village. So once a day a donkey with earthenware pitchers slung across its back clattered into the courtyard, and water was poured into the large porous jar which stood there on a wooden stand. The filtered water dripped into a smaller pot beneath. When Mikhail and I had finished our daily conference on food, meat was not always obtainable in the village, and fowls not easy to buy, for everyone had their own. Jadon and I set off up the mountainside, meaning to reach the ruins of an ancient stone fortress visible on the heights above. As we mounted, we met and chatted with peasant women who complained that though rains in the early year had been good, more showers were needed because of the blight that had attacked the barley. They pointed to yellowing and drooping blades and said that rain would give the young shoots strength to resist it, and rains were still due before the summer drought. They scanned the sky with watchful eyes. The crops in the hill country are not irrigated by rivers in the south, but are like English fields, dependent upon the sky. I asked the Mukhtar one day what was done in a dry season, and he told me of a rain charm. A boy and girl go from house to house in the village and perform a dance, at the end of which each householder throws water upon them. At the same time, I learnt that at the beginning of the harvest, a sheep is sacrificed, and another when the last sheaf is gathered in. Well, a lot of the harvest myths, connect it to a being actually dying, and sometimes it is represented by a ritual with a animal that is sacrificed. I'm talking about other cultures too. The higher we traveled by the rocky track, the more numerous and varied were the flowers. Besides umbellifera, buttercups, ranunculus, and the red and yellow adonis, there were many strange to me. Especially lovely was a flower like a yellow rock rose, with a leaf and stem like a flax plant, plus possibly linum mucranatum. Jadon gathered a bunch of it, and it perfumed our living room now for days. Thistles were plentiful, and in particular a handsome thistle with milky markings called var syllabum marianum by the Kurds. It is common in Sicily, a country of which I was reminded at every step, and the peasants there explained the white markings by saying that the virgin's milk was so generous that as she sat in the fields with the Holy Child, it spurted out and marked the green leaves forevermore. Another thistle was the ka'ub. It is edible, and as vegetables were difficult to come by in Bashika, except as gifts, Mikhail had made us a dish of these the night before, sprinkled with cheese, and extremely good it was. I tasted ka'ub first in the desert when I was the guest of the Shamar Bedouin. Another vegetable that we gathered for ourselves is called the kubaz by the Arabs. It is a common weed with a leaf like the mallow and tastes like spinach. Gundelia terforti. We found that we had missed the path to the Topser, which was separated from us by a ravine, so climbed up rocks to a plateau from which we could see over long plains and bluish hills for 50 miles or more. Here we added our stones to a cairn at the highest point. Jadon gazed towards the Jebel Sinjar, where he had left his wife and 2 young children, and praised its air and scenery. Near his home, he said, was a mazar called Sheikh Abul Qasim. Pilgrims who visit it and abstain from animal food for 7 days and nights are, he said, sure to get their desire. But they must not forget to pay the guardian as much as they can. 20 fils, 50 fils, or even 100, that is 2 shillings. Cheap for the wish of one's heart. I asked about the cleft in the rocks, said to be in the Jebel Sinjar, into which money and jewels have been cast by Yazidis for centuries. Of this I heard a story. A Yazidi, thinking of the treasure lying at the bottom of the chasm, had an idea. He lowered a piece of wood thickly smeared with pitch in the depths on a long rope. Fishing like this, he managed to secure some coins and ornaments. He could not keep his El Dorado to himself, however, and when his secret leaked out, the inhabitants of the mountain chased him, and he fled in terror of his life. Now, yeah, don't take stuff from people's religious shrines, even if they are piling up a bunch of money in a hole or something. Over there, said Jadon, pointing northeast, is Sheikh Adet. Whether God willing, Khatun, we shall go together. He would go gladly, for he had not been there on pilgrimage since he was taken as a child. On the way down, we paused before a stream gushing from a green pocket on the hillside. We followed it to the spring which fed it, where grass grew lush beneath the poplar trees. Here at the fountainhead was a tiny shrine with a minute fluted spire and a guardian a wall. The usual sacred tree had withered, but nevertheless was adorned with rags of many colors, and a sacred stone beneath the cone was in a recess, closed by a stone disc like a cupboard. Within it was an olive lamp of classic pattern. Some 2-3 women with their children were whiling the time by the spring. The girls had put ranunculus in their hair. Is that the red flower that they collect for Red Wednesday? Tuesday night. Following the day. Their hands and arms were tattooed, and they were amused by my interest in the designs. The Kawal, bearded and benign, told me that his wife was a Dagaga, a tattooist by profession. We asked about the shrine as the Kawal removed the disc so that we might place an offering by the stone. Those who have fever, he said, tie rags to the tree. By the mercy of God, it leaves them. The Gaga, I wonder how that breaks down. Does it relate to terms connected to fish? But the patron of this small shrine, enclosed by a rough wall, between the stones of which grew borage, ranunculus, and thistles, was Azrael. Yet, in such a spot, he, the death angel, seemed far away, even when I returned to our own courtyard, where the happy twitter of swallows filled the archway as they darted to and fro to their nestlings. It was hard to realize when I opened letters from Baghdad that he was active, and the bombs and the machine guns were scattering death in Norway. The news was troubling, for till now the absence of radio and daily papers had almost persuaded me that war was an evil dream. Now we see 5 dots. Is something omitted, or is it just, because sometimes that's the decoration of a book. But Azrael is, in sort of this context, more like Nasu, the demon of the death pollution in the Yazidi. I mean, in Avestan, like, which tells you, the names don't matter as much as you think. Or, the names mean something different to different people. On the previous morning in Bahsani, seeing the village street, the exiled sheikh on a neighboring roof, I shouted across to ask after his little daughter. He shouted back, better. And when Rashid arrived to ask me to drink tea at his house, news came that the child was still alive. With Rashid came the aged sheikha, Sitt Gule, to return my visit to her and to tell me that she purposed to journey to Mosul, where her son was imprisoned, to plead with the Mutasarrif for his release. There was injustice, she said. Men judged by the courts martial had been given sentences of 15 years, whereas her son had been sentenced by a civil court to 8. Amnesty had been granted to those imprisoned by the courts martial, but her son, convicted of a lighter offense, still languished in prison. Would I, whose husband was of the Hukuma in the Ministry of Justice, write a letter to the Mutasarrif and secure his liberty? How difficult it was to explain to her as gently as I could that to reverse or influence a sentence passed by the courts was neither in my power nor my husband's. In this country, where public duty is often subordinated to the claims of family interest or a private friendship, the cold Western ideal of absolute impersonality in official matters seems both unnatural and inhuman. I tried later to explain this to Rashid when I turned with him to sit under his pergola of young vines. He boiled a kettle and made me a glass of tricolor tea, white at the bottom where sugar had melted with hot water. Above that, an infusion of young lemon leaves, pale green, and above that, the amber of the tea. True, he said, but still perhaps a little puzzled. Your English have other ways, but I understand something of the manners of English and Americans, for I was long with them when they were working at Tel Bila. He went on to talk of the excavators, especially of his admiration for Dr. Spicer, of whom everyone in the village spoke well. This led us on to speak of the change that was coming over the ideas of the people with the introduction of the state schools. Rashid pointed out that the difficulty was that the cultivation of the land was almost entirely in the hands of the Yazidis, and at some seasons farmers could ill spare the help of their children. Moreover, they feared that the schools would rob them of their sons and send them to the cities. I assured him that with that point of view, I was in sympathy, and that education authorities, no doubt, would eventually realize these difficulties and meet them. Inwardly, I contrasted the good manners of the peasant lads I met with those of elder lads in government Hakke that I met coming from school. These were inclined to talk loudly, and for my benefit as I passed, although, when I had occasion to speak to them about anything, their nationalistic assertiveness deflated, and their natural curiosity reasserted itself. Moreover, it seemed to me that the children I saw in the fields had not only the advantage in manners, but were equal in intelligence and quickness to any of the school-bred youngsters. It soon got abroad that letters had been brought to me, and I was questioned about the news. This happened every time that a police car brought me mail, and if I could say that some successes had fallen to the Allies, there were smiles and Allah be thanked. Sitt Gule had offered to conduct me to some of the shrines accordingly in the afternoon, after I had shared my news with the mudir of the village. She came to fulfill her promise. She had been handsome in her youth and still carried herself as erect as a girl. Her ankles, thrust into worn old slippers, were slim and her skin almost as white as her clothes. As we walked uphill, she told me in a disjointed way more of her history. We paused by the watermill to enjoy the wholesome smell of flour and watch the water swirling up from beneath the wheel, then continued past the olive presses, following the stream between the green hills. Yes, she said, I've known trouble, much trouble. My husband was in prison 15 years, kept there by the Turks. He was a very good man, never killed anyone, nor stole. But I forget the string of negative virtues. His crime was of having opposed the government in some vague way. The Yazidis have got the habit of thinking all governments their natural oppressors and accept them like the drought or the storm. Yeah, you're sort of forced to, but and you got to find out what that limit is. At what point do you stop believing and obeying your government? That was not all. I had 3 children. Khatun, 2 sons, my son that is in prison in Mosul, and another his younger brother, and the third was a daughter, lady before me in my very presence. My younger son slew my daughter. He cut her throat before my eyes. Her voice grew deep as we picked our way over the stones. Why? I asked. Why? What were his reasons? There was talk, she answered darkly. The girl was sweet, and there was talk about her. Talk? Hatche? In the vulgar Arabic. Oh, hakpe? Often means scandal about the girl's chastity. But I learnt later that there was no question of this. It was only a case of love outside the caste. The old Sheikah, however, did not explain. She only said, as if to herself, the girl was sweet and there was talk. I had but the one, and she was 17, no older. So definitely an honor killing, which is one of the downsides of that, kindred honor can go into that direction, right? Because if there's wrongdoing, but they think they feel disrespected. That's when it becomes honor killing. What happened to him? I asked. She replied that he had been tried for his life, but that was, as it was, a question of family honor. He'd been cast into prison. His wife, mother of a child, was even now in her house together. His elder brothers, 2 wives, and children. The thing had happened a short 4 months ago, and she had nothing to say against the judgment, for she said he must pay for taking his sister's life. And one of the things about that, though, it shouldn't matter your intentions. Now, if you're confused and you think there's been a rape or murder or something like that, and you're reacting against that, and it turns out not to be, or it should have been left to the authorities, that's perhaps different. But family honor, I don't, or some other intention like that, I don't think there should be any difference in the sentencing. But my elder son, she said, his brother is unjustly imprisoned, and Khatun, it is for him that I trouble and work to get him out. We were back at the old sad question. By this time, we had reached the upper washing pool at Ras Al Ain, where the women knelt on the stones with their fat cakes of homemade soap beside them, thumping and ringing and rinsing. I followed her to the spot where the stream disappears behind the rocks. Thumping. Well, some people rub the soap all over themselves. Some people get the suds straight off the soap, and those people, their soap lasts longer, but I'm not sure what the thing is. Now, this poll seems to be one that they would, that there would be some natural level of privacy because of the steepness on the other side of the pool. Come, she said, and began to climb up the smooth rock, putting her foot into crevices here and there. Something, of course, that people will work out over time if they can, anyways. Or they'll go back, well, one way or another, right? Sometimes there's a project that, oh, people might slip or fall here, so we're building sort of a stairway here, or cutting footholes. And I followed half, unwillingly for the thought. Now, I followed half unwillingly for the thought of returning. She persisted. Come, come. Round the corner were worn steps cut in the rock. Over the boulder, a sharp turn to the right brought us into a cavern, the birthplace of the spring, for here it issued from the rock. And that's important mythologically sometimes to find out. Ras El Ain, behind the rock in the foreground, is a sacred cavern containing the rock sculptures. Okay. This, she said, is Kaf. I give the word as she pronounced it, although a schoolmaster pointed out later that the word is Kahaf, meaning simply cavern. Well, she could have been referring to the mystical mountain of Kaf. I am certain, however, that to Sitt Gule, whose native language is Kurdish, Kaf is the name of the genius of the place. She pointed out his image to me within the cave where the water has worn a deep channel, dissecting the floor. A chamber is formed in the natural rock, and the hand of man has been at work. Here are niches blackened by the smoke of votive lamps, shelves for offerings and lights. 3 panels are carved within the chamber. One is completely defaced. A second contains a single seated figure facing the worshipper, almost Buddha-like in its dignity and repose, though it is not cross-legged. The figure wears a conical cap and is seated in a conventional concave frame, shaped like a lotus or flower bud. The third panel is chipped and defaced, but a seated and bearded personage, also wearing a conical cap, is plainly visible. Also a procession advancing towards him on a wave of movement and worship. A lifted arm holds a dish aloft, but most of the detail has been destroyed. On the floor of the chamber is traced an oblong with 12 small round depressions, placed 6 aside, possibly a gaming board. Crossing the stream to the other part of the chamber, one can see on the rock above the spring, the damaged full face, low relief of a head, bearded and wearing headgear similar to that of the other 2 figures. A niche containing a lamp of antique pattern is cut into the rock beside it. On my return to Baghdad, I reported these carvings to the Department of Antiquities, which had no record of the place. It sounds like the Sakas, the Gog and Magog, Juj wa Majuj, Hyperborean culture, right? Two girls followed us into the cave. One said that the figure was off, the other that it was just the name of the shrine. The water, they said, was always cold, and in summer, if they bathed here, it was like ice. One of the girls, a Muslim, but wearing the Kurdish dress, worn here irrespective of faith, accompanied us as far as the mill. She was tall, with eyes gray-green, like clear sea water, with black lashes and an oval face. I remarked upon her beauty when she had left us, with a protective mashallah, for one must not praise without invoking the name of God. And their willingness to use the language of whatever, and perhaps to be non-obscured from the others, because they certainly would believe that they worship the real God. But girls, I think they just mean young women, because remember that talk about the 30 is the cutoff date for how people dress and all that stuff. The next morning, Sitt Gule was to show me more of the shrines. Jadon and I called for her. She was ready for us and took us first to the largest and most important shrine of Bashika, that of the Sheikh Mohammed Al Khudayfa. It stands at the edge of the village, hard by the modest Jacobite church, which again is a bare stone's throw from the ambitious Latin building. It is at Sheikh Mohammed's shrine that the religious ceremonies of the spring feast-like take place, and the grassy open space before it is used both as a fairground and dancing floor. We could not get in the gate to the courtyard, and the garden was locked, so that we instead took the road to Bahsani. There are two paths to that village, and just where they fork, the Sheikha paused by a mazar, roughly enclosed by a low wall. There was no tomb or cone, the object of veneration being merely a large stone set in the semicircular enclosure. On either side of the stone were a number of broken pitchers, and with them a rusty tin can or so. Also a wooden spoon carved from a single piece of wood. Now, I would have made a note of how many broken pitchers and stuff, and how many of this stuff. Sitt Gule meant to kiss the wall in several places, and a woman, passing and seeing her devotion, paused by to say that one day, when walking by the shrine, she had omitted to visit, that is, to kiss it. And from that moment, she said, my eyes swelled up and became painful. So saying, she too bent and kissed the stone and walls before reshouldering her bundle and going her way. This, said Sitt Gule, sitting on the low wall, is the mazar of Sheikh Mus Asor Mustred. And she explained the broken pottery. Those who suffer from itch or any skin affection visit the shrine bearing water in a vessel. When they have saluted the place, they pour the water on the ground, scrape up some moistened dust, and apply it to the part affected, to which they either break the pitcher after it or cast down the vessel, leaving it behind them. You English, she said, half smiling, buy bottles of dawa medicine from a doctor, but we go to our shrines. Sitt Gule, at the shrine of Mus Asor, is the illustration. Her face, hands, and sometimes her feet would be showing if she moved, but the feet are covered here just to illustrate that. A pile of rocks, sort of flat, so sort of an altar. Pretty big, maybe a couple human heights length. I'm not sure of the other dimensions from the picture. Jadon added to this by saying that some sheikhs, I don't know all the plurals because obviously the S is not the right, at the end is not the right plural, kept by them boxes of dust from various shrines, each good for some complaint such as sore eyes, aching limbs, constipation, or diarrhea. Drunken water for internal complaints are applied outwardly for external. These were effectual cures if taken after 7 days of fasting and prayer. Well, we find with modern medicine too, so much of its effectiveness is the faith that, oh, we're taking medicine. Some medicines have even been proved on that grounds that, oh, well, it does show a difference. And it's like, well, they could have given them anything and had that level of difference. We followed the left or lower road and came on another shrine. This time it was a low grave of the common type, rough stones marking head and foot, and without inscription. Like Sheikh Moose, it was surrounded by mounds of potsherds, rusty cans, and glass bottles. The headstone had disappeared under a skein of white woolen threads, these being twisted round so as to envelop completely the stone beneath. The name of the patron is Pir Mame, and the shrine is famed for curing heart or headache. It is not enough to pour water and apply the sacred clay, but a fair white woolen thread, homespun and washed by a mother and daughter, must be brought and twined round the headstone. Skirting the olive groves below Bahzana, the erect old woman held out her bare arm. Feel, she said. Her skin was burning and dry, and the pulse was rapid. You have fever, I exclaimed, concerned. Let us return at once. It is nothing, said she. Doesn't your head ache? She declared that it did not, and that in any case she intended to go to Mosul at dawn the next day to see Mutasarrif. Binding her resolve to proceed, we followed her to Mazar of Sheikh Mas'ud. This consisted of a small building surmounted by the usual fluted cone, and to the east of a small courtyard surrounded by a wall low enough to step over. A smaller rounded cone with a hole in it for offerings is placed at the northwest corner of the shrine. Here Sitt Gule prayed long and fervently in Kurdish, kissing the cornerstone many times. For my son, she said, looking at me and always hoping that I might be an answer to her prayers. Nearby, close to Bahzana, is another shrine similar to that of Sheikh Mas'ud, built above a grave. A woman passing cried out angrily when she saw me writing down its name, Sheikh Abdul Aziz, in my notebook. Do not let her take its likeness. The Sheikha, with the authority of a superior caste, rebuked her intolerance. We all called in at the house of the Sheikh in Bahzana to inquire again after the health of the injured child. Were cordially received. The little girl was not only alive, but up and about, though with a very swollen and blackened eye. The Sheikh said that he would come and see me, and my hope was high that he would do so and would talk, but in spite of his obvious friendliness, he never kept his word. It is probable that the people of Bahzana, more fanatical than those of Bahshika, dissuaded him from his purpose, for he sent me an odd message that he was afraid to come. We returned by the upper road, passing by the shrine of Sheikh Sajaddin, white and shining upon its green hilltop. Sitt Gule pointed out it as that of her ancestor. Then, negligently, she mentioned a still more illustrious relative, the Archangel Gabriel. Yazidi legend considers the companions of Sheikh Ade too holy to have married and had children in the ordinary way. Indeed, it is claimed that they were incarnations of angels descended from such incarnations. Hence, Sitt Gule was merely voicing the family tradition. Now, one of the things that we find is that there's talk about angels is more similar to the jinn than the malaika. But again, put it in the language of the people of the time, Azrael and Gabriel and stuff like this. So the Muslims and the Jews don't immediately grow suspicious, right? Jibra'il, she said, is also of our family. He who cuts off the head of the dead. Cuts off the head of the dead, I repeated, slightly aghast. Yes, she replied. Do not the angels Azrael and Gabriel come at the time of death? It is Gabriel who cuts off the head to let the ruh fly out. Now, ruh as in the spirit, as distinguished from the soul. I asked a Gawal later about this belief, and he qualified Sitt Gule's statement. He does not cut off the head, he said. He cuts the throat so that the spirit can come forth. Well, depends on the myth, right? Other white cone shrines on the hilltops between the two villages are those of Sheikh Hassan al-Basra, either a central path like many of the other shrines, or else wrongly named the tomb of Hassan al-Basri as shown at Sheikh Ada, below which was a peasant woman devoutly kissing the rock, and a group dedicated to Sheikh Zindan, his sister, Sitt Nefasa, and his mother, Khadija. Sitt Gule told me that Sheikh Zindan, being imprisoned in Damascus, sent a message by carrier pigeon to his mother and sister in the Akari Mountains. They traveled to Syria and pleaded for him so movingly that he was released. We returned to Bashika, and I wrote a letter for the Sheikha to take with her on the morrow. I did not venture to write to the Mutasarrif personally, lest it be said that an Englishwoman was attempting to interfere with official matters. Addressing those convenient people whom it may concern, I told of the old woman's difficulties and poverty, and hoped that if the sentence could be mitigated in any way without interfering with the course of justice, her circumstances might be taken into consideration. The letter was never delivered. Burning with fever, the old woman set out for the journey to Mosul the next day. When she got there, she found the Mutasarrij had left Mosul in order to see some locust fighting operations in a village miles away.